Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and this time we are talking about how the Nintendo Switch 2 rumors are looking to be true. But you might be asking, which rumors am I even referring to here? The rumors I'm referring to here are some that we discussed last week, and how these stories were indicating a Switch 2 release time, along with a big presentation and some other little details. We've gotten more updates that are further supporting these recent stories, and on top of that, there has been a discovery that is giving us a bit more insight into what sort of features the Switch 2 may have. So there is a lot to get into today. But before going forward, let me ask that if you do enjoy my content, to please subscribe and hit that notification bell. And if you're unsure, watch through this video and then consider subscribing and hitting that bell. So to catch some of you up on what's been happening over the last few days, there were two different rumors we've discussed. One was a rumor coming from this publication, Nintendo, where they cited 6 different developer sources that were telling them that the Switch 2 is coming out in either June or July. But then we also have this potential leaker who's been getting multiple stories right throughout this year, Samus Hunter, who chimed in on this recent report from Nintendo and has indicated that they've heard something similar. But they expanded the window to May at the very earliest, July at the very latest. And on top of that, there is talk of a big presentation that would include a huge emphasis on Metroid Prime 4, and it seems to have been indicated to have something to do with the Switch 2. Well, now we have 2 different news stories that seem to be backing this up to some extent here. One of them isn't even a rumor, it's hard information. Taking a look at this Universal Nintendo article here, they are reporting on some information that was discovered and discussed from family boards, including some discoveries made by Forward Backward. And essentially it's discussed how Foxconn Tech has reported a 223% year-over-year increase in this month of November, and since the company has not forecasted any revenue growth for its other business lines, many are assuming this has to do with the assembly in mass of the Switch 2. And what's also been discussed is that this information would only be reported if it's been transferred to the customer already, because Foxconn Tech abides by the International Financial Reporting Standards. So what people are taking this to mean is that there are already completed Switch 2s in the box, ready to be out there in the wild at Nintendo. Foxconn has delivered the goods, a fully assembled Switch 2. So if this interpretation is to be correct, and there aren't many who are really disputing this right now, then it strongly suggests that this idea of Switch 2 making it out sometime in the first half of 2025 is actually a pretty reasonable expectation. Going back to Switch 1, mass manufacturing started in October, the console came out in March. So if we are already seeing evidence of mass manufacturing, and we're even hearing some things suggesting that there are completed Switch 2s in boxes at Nintendo by this point in the year, while we're not arguing a March launch at this point, it just coming out a few short months later seems to coincide with what we're hearing from Nintendo and Samus Hunter of a May to July release window. But to further back up this information, Nate the Hate has said something very similar in their podcast that they released today. Nate the Hate talked about how he has heard industry chatter that has indicated a late May to June release for the Switch 2. And so what's interesting about this is that Nintendo did not mention May. They said June to July. Samus Hunter was the one that indicated May as also a possibility. And so it looks like Nate the Hate is hearing the same industry chatter as Samus Hunter. But here's where things get even more interesting, because not only did Nate mention that, they also mentioned that there's supposed to be a big presentation in May, perhaps having to do with some sort of launch event for the Switch 2. And remember how we discussed that Samus Hunter has mentioned something similar about there being a big presentation and Metroid Prime 4 having a big emphasis. I've been theorizing for a long time that Metroid Prime 4 will be a cross-generation title. Now, technically, we haven't seen anyone openly say that Metroid Prime 4 is going to be a cross-gen title. That is my interpretation, that is my theory, but I do think Metroid Prime 4 is something that Nintendo is going to be pushing in a very big way. There could be some similarities to how they treated Breath of the Wild. I'm not arguing that the expectations that it will sell similarly, but in terms of it being a big Switch 1 game, maybe also having a big Switch 2 version, it could be a fantastic cross-gen title to show the improvements of Switch 2 and function as a nice transition title between generations. But there is some room for interpretation on what this event might be in May. Is it going to be the equivalent to the January Switch presentation we had back in January of 2017, where it was essentially this live conference that told us everything we needed to know about the Nintendo Switch? The Switch didn't come out till March 3rd, so we had to wait about a month and a half after the event. If we are to be getting a May event for Switch 2 that's like this, does that mean that we're really more so looking at like a July launch? Possibly, but they could also be having a quicker turnaround here. Something else I'll mention though is that maybe this isn't exactly the same thing as what they did for Switch 1 back in January, but it's actually more so like a hands-on event where either media or even people in the public can have an opportunity to play this console, and it might not be the exact same thing. The full-on reveal with all the details and pre-orders and such may be done before this point in time. There's room for debate there. Now personally, if you ask me, would pre-orders be made available just a few weeks away from the release of a next-generation console? I think there has to be a bit more time than that, like maybe a few months. Perhaps those pre-orders would go up when they have the initial reveal of the console. That's possible. Now, something that's being discussed right now is that PAX East is actually happening in the first half of May. And what's interesting about this is that typically, PAX is not this late into the year. Some are thinking that perhaps they moved up PAX because it was indicated to the decision makers of PAX East that the Switch 2 would be coming out around this time, and they might want to have some Switch 2 games playable at the event. The timing is very curious here. Normally PAX is earlier, but now that we're hearing about Switch 2 stuff happening in May, it definitely has me thinking that something's going on there. But the interesting news does not stop there. Nintendo recently has announced that their next investors meeting will be taking place on February 4th, 2025. And it is believed that by this point Nintendo will be giving us even more information about the Switch 2, which is early February. And many have been theorizing that Nintendo would be revealing the Switch 2 in either late January or early February. So their investors meeting is interestingly timed according to the speculation here. And if they are releasing the console in the May-June period, then this would probably be the right time to reveal the console if they're doing something similar to how they handled Switch 1, where they revealed it October 20th, they launched it March 3rd, a 4.5 month gap. This would be a very similar span of time here. So we now have multiple bits of info. Some of it is hard information like of the Foxconn revenue data, but there's certainly some room for interpretation there. And then we also have multiple rumors from different places that seemingly have some credibility. But there's a little bit more hard information that's gone out there that is perhaps telling us about Switch 2. Depends on how you interpret it. Friend of the channel, Super Metal Dave 64, made a discovery that they discussed in one of their recent videos, which will be linked in the description below, where we have this Nintendo job opening for an electromechanical engineer. And when we look at the summary of requirements, they need experience with high-speed signaling and power delivery on PCB designs that contain elements such as PCIe, DDR4, MIPI, and SD Express. So the Switch does not have SD Express support. So the speculation is that Nintendo is hiring for electromechanical engineers that now have experience with SD Express, which may mean that the Switch 2 is compatible with SD Express, or at least something very similar. and it's already widely believed that the Switch 2 will have some vastly improved internal storage. But what are they going to do for external storage, because SD cards, compared to modern day consoles, don't run really that fast? SD Express would certainly help to bridge that gap significantly, and this could be an indication of the kind of external storage we'll be seeing for Switch 2. Since Nintendo's moving in this direction of hybrid consoles, we assume Switch 2 is going to be another hybrid console. Feels like a pretty safe assumption considering everything we've heard and with just the success of the Switch. How they handle storage is a little bit of a trickier situation than your typical home console. You can't just put a big solid-state drive and call it a day. They need to consider other options, and having some nice expandable storage, perhaps in the form of SD Express, could go a long ways. But that is essentially all the updates going on right now for the Switch 2 situation. It is looking like we'll have some fast external and internal storage, but also we'll be seeing some actual real information from Nintendo about this console in maybe the late January, early February period, if not sooner, by surprise. And the console looks to be launching at the very earliest late May and at the very latest July, with a big event of some kind, where perhaps there'll be a lot of hands-on experiences in the earlier part of May. But what do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart, thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.